Summer 1940, the United Kingdom is gripped by the fear of a German invasion. France has been defeated, and a German air and seaborne assault on the British Isles looks imminent. As both Britain and Germany scramble to prepare, their air forces fight for control over the skies of Britain. For Germany, victory is essential for an amphibious landing. But even if they do win, could Germany ever really invade Great Britain? By June 1940, Britain is in a deep and growing crisis. German forces have decisively defeated France, resulting in the evacuation from Dunkirk. On June 10th, Norway surrenders following a German amphibious invasion, while on June 30th, Germany occupies the Channel Islands, British sovereign territory. Britain's pre-war plans did not foresee the country faced with German-occupied territory from Norway to the Spanish border. In June, Britain's home forces number 15 infantry divisions and 1 armoured division, and most are understrength and undertrained. More troops arrive via evacuations, the Commonwealth, and through hasty recruitment, but there's not enough equipment to go around. British forces rush to build chains of pillboxes, mortar emplacements, and fortified houses across the country, especially along the coastal crust and interior general headquarters lines. There are also more novel defences, such as the flame fougasse, barrels of napalm fired at invaders. Pre-prepared stay-behind guerrilla units are expected to hit flimsy German logistical routes after an invasion. There's also a mass recruitment drive for the new local defense volunteers. Within 6 days of its formation in May, 250,000 men outside of conscription age sign up. But with only 70,000 rifles to arm them, they'll use anything to fight. Improvised weapons could be usefully supplemented by a packet of pepper to interfere with the vision of any persistent unwelcome visitor. British fears stem from overestimating German power, especially in terms of tanks, mechanization, and airborne troops. Paratroopers in particular seem to render the Channel impotent as a defensive barrier. A June 1940 pamphlet warns, "Remember that if parachutists come, they will not be feeling at all brave. They will want you to give them food, means of transport, and maps. Do not give any German anything. Do not tell him anything. Hide your food and your bicycles. Hide your maps. See that the enemy gets no petrol." To British leaders, the German plan to dominate Europe is succeeding, and they're next on the list. We may therefore be sure there is a plan, perhaps built up over years, for destroying Great Britain, which, after all, has the honor to be Germany's main and foremost enemy. But Adolf Hitler has no plan for defeating Britain. A November 1939 Kriegsmarine report envisioned an invasion in East Anglia, but was not optimistic about its chances. In early July, Hitler tells his generals he still hopes Britain will surrender. Hitler astonished us by speaking with admiration of the British Empire. He said that all he wanted from Britain was that she should acknowledge Germany's position on the continent. He concluded by saying that his aim was to make peace with Britain on a basis that she would regard as compatible with her honor to accept. But on July 16th, with RAF bombers now striking German targets in Europe, Hitler orders preparations for Operation Sea Lion in somewhat tentative terms. Since England, in spite of her hopeless military situation, shows no signs of being ready to come to an understanding, I have decided to prepare a landing operation against England and, if necessary, to carry it out. The Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe, and Kriegsmarine rush to develop a plan, but all three have different priorities and expectations. The army favors a surprise invasion across a broad front by up to 40 divisions with tanks. A tactical analysis expects the operation to be similar to a large river crossing, in which aggressive spirit prevails. It is assumed that the battle is conducted in the manner of an attack across a river, but that no fire protection can be provided from the jumping offshore. Alle Führer gehören nach vorn. Ihr Beispiel entscheidet. All leaders need to be in front. Their example decides. The Navy points out that this is impossible. They don't have the transport to move 40 divisions and want a more concentrated attack to focus resources and evade the more powerful Royal Navy. General Franz Halder angrily responds, "I utterly reject the Navy's proposal. From the point of view of the Army, I regard the proposal as complete suicide. I might as well put the landed troops straight through the sausage machine." The result is a compromise. The assault force is scaled down to 13 divisions, 90,000 men, landing at 3 main locations isolated from the Royal Navy by mines. Supported by paratrooper drops, German forces would secure a line from Gravesend to Warsash. If successful, another force would land in Dorset and push for Bristol. As the invasion force increases to 260,000 German troops, they would push to a new line from Gloucester to Malden, encircling London. Planners expect that threatening the capital will lead to capitulation as it had in France. But the plan has many flaws. Surprise is impossible due to tidal variations along the landing beaches, which means invading forces will land at different times. The 12 hours between the first 2 assault waves means defenders and the Royal Navy could isolate the beachheads or mount counterattacks. Germany has no marine infantry, little experience in amphibious landings, and lacks specialized equipment, especially landing craft. There are a few prototype landing craft in development, but the Kriegsmarine requisitions 2,400 continental river barges as transports to make up a deficit of 1.35 million tons in shipping. Some will need to be welded together to make it across the channel, while many would be permanently grounded after landing. Aside from a weak plan and lack of shipping, another obstacle is the Royal Air Force. So Hitler orders Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring to achieve air superiority over southern England as a prelude to an invasion in late September. The RAF is battered after the Battle of France. They lost 1,500 killed, including 300 pilots and 950 aircraft over France. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 3,600 killed or missing, with 1,400 aircraft lost. Most Luftwaffe losses, though, were bombers or transports, while most RAF losses were fighters vital for the defense of Britain. RAF Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding resisted calls to send more RAF fighter squadrons to France once it was a lost cause, but average experience level is low. Technology and tactics are also critical, which is why we talked to military aviation expert Christoph Bergs.
To set the stage for any invasion, the Luftwaffe had to achieve air superiority over Britain. During the ensuing battle, both sides quickly realized that, well, the twin-engine fighters, Bf-110s, the dive bombers, the Ju-87s, and the biplanes, Gloucester Gladiators, and all the bombers were very vulnerable. In fact, the highest RAF crew losses during the battle was from Bomber Command, flying missions into Germany. Yet, the battle for air superiority would be largely fought between the fighters, the Spitfires, the Hurricanes, and the Bf-109s. Here we have, of course, the classic debate, Spitfire versus Bf-109, which was superior. Well, actually, both planes are remarkably similar, with almost equal performance. They had short range, they were fast, they had strong climbs, and technologically sophisticated for the time. Stronger firepower, a better initial dive, and direct fuel injection spoke in favor of the Bf-109. But the Spitfire was better in sustained turns, but it did lack direct fuel injection and heavy firepower. Then there was of course pilot skill and tactics. Though they had taken quite substantial losses in France, the Luftwaffe pilots on the whole had more combat experience. They preferred attacking from above and operated in pairs, so the Røste, with a 4-plane Schwarm formation. And as such, they actually used the same sort of 2-ship, 4-ship configuration that we largely see in use today with modern air forces. The RAF instead flew in a tight 3-plane Vic formation, the standard of the time. Wingmen concentrated on maintaining formation and following the leader. And this made the formation rather unwieldy once in the air and very slow to respond to sudden threats. At first, Fighter Command was somewhat reluctant to introduce changes and tactical reforms, as retraining takes time that Britain didn't have. And as such, some squadrons started to modify tactics on their own initiative. Yet 3 important elements spoke in favor of Britain. First, we of course have the geography. German fighters had limited range, and that limited their combat time over Britain. By contrast, British pilots could land and even resume the fight half an hour later after being well refueled and rearmed. Also, British pilots, when in need, bailed out over friendly territory and could thus take up the fight again if they were not wounded, unlike the German pilots who were captured. The second advantage was radar. Now, radar, or the chain-home radar system, could identify Luftwaffe formations long before they crossed the channel, giving the RAF ample time to scramble fighters. Radar was part of the first sophisticated integrated air defense system, including, of course, next to radar, the ground observers and the filter rooms that would quickly disseminate all that important information to the anti-aircraft batteries as well as the squadron bases. This meant that the Luftwaffe could not attack at surprise. Finally, the Luftwaffe was fighting a battle it was not designed for. While it certainly focused on bombers as the main tool of delivering air power, this was very much entrenched in German operational thinking. It had been created mainly for continental operations, as we saw in Poland and France. And over Britain, it was fighting a battle that probably no air force was equipped to win in 1940.
In July 1940, the Battle of France makes way for the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe has approximately 2,200 immediately serviceable aircraft, mostly bombers and dive bombers in Luftflotten 2 and 3 across the Channel and Luftflotte 5 in Norway. They will face off against roughly 640 combat-ready aircraft, mostly Hurricanes and Spitfires, in the 4 main RAF fighter command groups. The brunt of the attack is expected to fall against No. 11 Group, commanded by New Zealander Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, with the other groups providing support as needed. From mid-July to August 12th, the Luftwaffe launches the Kanalkampf, the Channel Battle. Fighting over the English Channel, they aim to bomb British convoys and force RAF fighters into dangerous dogfights over the water. These early air battles disprove some interwar theories on aerial combat, like the idea aircraft equipped with rear gunners outmatch single-seat fighters. British Bolt and Paul Defiance, German Stukas and Bf-110s suffer high losses to modern fighters. Luftwaffe losses outnumber RAF losses, but Dowding realizes he cannot match Luftwaffe raids plane for plane without unsustainably high casualties. Eventually, British convoys stop using the Channel and mostly give up the airspace to the Luftwaffe. It appears Göring has won the opening phase. In reality, the RAF recovers and gains new pilots every week, including from the Commonwealth, German-occupied nations, and the RAF Volunteer Reserve. But pilot experience varies greatly. New arrivals have as little as 9 hours flight time in an operational unit, with no aerial combat training. In Phase 2 of the battle, the Luftwaffe targets coastal radar installations, RAF bases, and aircraft factories. The Luftwaffe does knock out some radar stations, but it's hard for them to confirm damage, and they don't target the stations consistently, meaning damage is quickly repaired. As fighting moves over southern England, Dowding only sends up enough fighters to challenge Luftwaffe bombers and disrupt raids. These tactics make the Luftwaffe think the RAF is on its last legs, and Göring plans a knockout blow in mid-August called Adlerangriff, Eagle Attack. From August 13th to 19th, the Luftwaffe launched mass attacks against RAF fighter infrastructure, peaking on August 15th with 1,800 sorties. The skies over southern England are filled with daily dogfights as casualties mount on both sides. A lack of ammunition means combat is often short and sharp. Tracers passed above and below, curving downwards and giving the impression of flying in a gigantic cage of gilt wire. I looked for another target, and a Hun passed just to the right of me and slightly above. I raised the nose and at about 75 yards, opened fire. After 2 or 3 seconds, the steady rhythm of the Hurricane's 8 Browning machine guns turned into a series of feeble clicks. A quick glance in the mirror showed 3 more 109s on my tail. So I flicked the Hurricane on its side, skidding and turning until I was going flat out. The Luftwaffe damages several air bases and ammunition depots, but the British repair most of the damage, and the Germans rarely launch follow-up attacks. One experimental unit, Erprobungsgruppe 210, has success using Bf-110s in a ground attack role, but the Luftwaffe resists tactical change. Most Bf-110s remain as vulnerable heavy fighters. Historian Stephen Bungay concludes, had all the Bf-110 crews been retrained to deliver fast, low-level pinpoint attacks in the way that Erprobungsgruppe 210 were, Göring would have had a war-winning weapon in his hands. There are also German intelligence failings. The Luftwaffe loses around 50 planes attacking non-fighter command bases, and they mistakenly assume all RAF strength is concentrated in the south. On August 15th, a poorly escorted force of Heinkel bombers from Norway attempts to raid northern England, anticipating few defensive fighters. British reserve fighters in No. 13 Group intercept it and destroy almost 20% of the raiders. From August 13th to 19th, the Luftwaffe loses 363 aircraft, mostly bombers, destroyed or damaged to all causes. The RAF loses just 178. The British are downing German planes, but almost all British losses are fighters, and for the first time, losses are higher than replacements. British men and machines are wearing out. The Luftwaffe, though, is also exhausted. Fighter pilot Ulrich Steinhilper flew 7 sorties in one day. Although most of us were still not outwardly showing major signs of nerves, arguments were becoming more frequent, tempers frayed quicker. The strain of unrelenting frontline flying was beginning to show. However, experience does improve Luftwaffe tactics. They use feints to confuse British radar, and by late August, the Luftwaffe better understands the RAF sector system, hitting fighter air bases like Biggin Hill daily. Squadron leader Deacon Elliott recalls. No sooner had the squadron landed and refueled than the Germans bombed the airfield. This the second time in 2 days running, and the place was a terrible shambles. 29 killed yesterday, another 7 today. The RAF still has more pilots than planes, but numbers are dropping, from 1,400 pilots in July to 1,000 by the end of August. Czechoslovakian and Polish pilots in Britain are now fully mobilized despite Dowding's concerns about language problems. The losses also trigger strategic debates and tension between commanders. No. 12 Group Commander Trafford Leigh-Mallory, with the support of fighter ace Douglas Bader, believes mass big-wing formations are more effective at countering bombers than Dowding and Park's smaller interceptions designed to preserve strength. But Park argues such formations take too long to form up, especially in No. 11 Group, which often only has minutes to respond to raids. Big-wing experiments by No. 12 Group are mostly unsuccessful. But the so-called Big Wing controversy remains a point of contention between RAF commanders throughout the remainder of the battle and beyond. Meanwhile, in German-occupied ports, the invasion armada assembles. On September 7th, British commanders announce Cromwell, the code word warning of imminent invasion. Their decision is informed by other events. The same day, Luftwaffe bombers shift from attacking RAF bases to hitting London. Some claim the change is because Hitler is outraged by an RAF raid on Berlin, which was retaliation for an earlier, likely accidental bombing of London. Others think Göring hopes to provoke the RAF into a final battle that would damage British morale before an amphibious landing. The result, however, is a reprieve for the RAF. Attacks on RAF bases slow down, and although they're still losing fighters, the infrastructure to replace them recovers. 11 Group Commander Keith Park recalls. On the late evening of 7 September, I flew over London, and I can assure you that the East End of London and the Thames estuary were a grim sight. However, though I felt very angry, I said thank God, because I realized that the methodical Germans had at last switched their attacks from my vital aerodromes onto cities. The battle peaks again on September 15th with 2 massive German daylight raids totaling 250 bombers and more than 300 Bf-109s clashing with 300 RAF fighters. The Bf-109s are now in closer escort roles, robbing them of their initiative and making them more vulnerable. The raids cost the Luftwaffe 80 planes, including 23 Bf-109s, for 35 RAF losses. 2 days later, Hitler postpones the invasion of Britain indefinitely. Heavy fighting continues into October, but German bombers transition to safer, less accurate nighttime operations. By October 31st, Dowding considers the Battle of Britain to be over. RAF Fighter Command loses 449 pilots killed and 1,500 aircraft damaged or destroyed. Luftwaffe losses are 2,500 killed and 900 captured, with almost 2,800 aircraft destroyed or damaged. Most German losses are bombers, whose larger crews account for the higher casualty rate. German bombing kills about 23,000 civilians. The Luftwaffe's defeat has multiple causes, including British radar, poor German intelligence, and tactical disadvantages for Luftwaffe pilots, like fighting over enemy territory. It was also fighting a battle for which it was not designed. The Luftwaffe was influenced by interwar theories on strategic bombardment, but financial constraints and the dominance of the army in the German military resulted in an air force geared more towards supporting ground operations with light and dive bombers. These types of bombers lacked the offensive punch to operate unilaterally. Meanwhile, expectations air combat would be similar to naval combat prioritized more expensive turret-equipped heavy fighters. The Germans therefore lacked the capacity to produce enough single-engine fighters, which proved decisive in aerial combat. Historian Jens Wehner concludes. The Luftwaffe flew many inefficient airplanes, like bombers or Zerstörer, into battle. The existing aerial armament advantage in 1940 remained almost inconsequential. To focus on fighter production, Luftwaffe leadership would have to abandon their doctrine. But this was never considered because the German victories of 1939-40 obscured the weakness of the German doctrine. On a strategic level, Luftwaffe commanders and intelligence were poorly prepared for the task at hand. Whereas in combined air-ground operations, it was often sufficient to attack a target close to the front line once, during the Battle of Britain, RAF infrastructure needed to be hit regularly and deliberately. This the Germans did not do, and as a result, the damage caused was often temporary. The RAF, on the other hand, had been developed to counter the threat of strategic bombers and defend British airspace. Neville Chamberlain deserves some credit for this, as he prioritized funding for single-seat fighters like the Spitfire, partly for financial reasons, while others, including Churchill, favored bombers or heavy fighters. The government also funds and supports radar and the sophisticated system which underpinned RAF fighter command operations. Historian John Ray reminds us of the RAF's readiness. If the David and Goliath analogy is accepted, the former was better prepared and the latter less fearsome than customarily believed. It's often said that victory in the battle prevented an invasion of Britain and its likely defeat, but this is disputed. So did Sea Line ever stand a chance? Well, it's impossible to say exactly what would have happened had Britain lost the Battle of Britain. Some historians argue that if the full Sea Line forces had landed in Britain, they could have likely achieved their military objectives, although it remains unclear if Britain would have then surrendered. However, German aerial victory in August and September would not have guaranteed a landing. Firstly, there were only 7 days in those months where the tides were adequate, meaning the Luftwaffe would have to further exhaust itself maintaining air superiority over England until the invasion. With the RAF able to recover in bases beyond Luftwaffe range, that would be difficult. The Royal Navy Home Fleet also remained a significant threat. With few torpedo bombers, it's unlikely the Luftwaffe would have defeated it from the air. With the Kriegsmarine still recovering from the Norway operation and lacking heavy ships, it was unprepared for battle with the Royal Navy in the Channel. The Royal Navy would have likely swept mine barriers within days, allowing the Royal Navy access to the vulnerable logistical sea routes. They would have lost ships in a risky operation, but stopping or degrading Sea Line would have far outweighed losses. German planning was also deficient. They hoped to transport around 100,000 men in the first 2 waves with about 2,000 canal barges. During 1944's Operation Overlord, though, the Allies needed 4,000 purpose-built landing craft to ship 132,000 men. By that point, the Allies had the benefit of experience from successful and failed amphibious landings in France, the Mediterranean, and the Pacific. In 1940, the Germans had no such experience. German inter-service cooperation, vital for amphibious operations, was hampered by rivalries and Hitler's preference for individual instead of group conferences. It's also likely that some commanders doubted Sea Line from the start but didn't want to criticize Hitler's directive, as Vice Admiral Kurt Assmann later claimed. When the time came for the final decision, none of the responsible personalities was ready, despite his knowledge of the weighty matters at stake, to take a firm stand against the operation. All, however, were inwardly relieved to be able to find, in the lack of air mastery, a sound argument which would openly justify them in abandoning the operation. Also, even if Germany could invade, would they have tried? The occupation of Britain, not guaranteed to be short or easy, would be a considerable drain on resources at a time when Hitler was shifting his attention east. From a German perspective, invading Britain was not a necessary prerequisite for invading the Soviet Union, and might even prevent it. By December, Hitler is already making plans against the Soviets, and unlike the cautious phrasing of Directive Number 16, Directive Number 21 is forceful. The German Wehrmacht must be prepared to crush Soviet Russia in a quick campaign, even before the conclusion of the war against England. For this purpose, the army will have to employ all available units. So, as 1941 looms, Britain is still in the fight, and with Hitler's obsession with the Soviet Union pushing towards a massive escalation in the war, Germany will soon find itself fighting the two-front war it desperately wants to avoid. The Battle of Britain, especially in the UK, is remembered as a struggle of the few, a handful of fighter pilots against the mighty Luftwaffe. But this narrative often leaves out the roles of bomber crews, coastal command, the observer corps, radar operators, plotters, ground and repair crew, anti-aircraft gunners, and air raid wardens, among others. If you want to learn more about these people on the ground and the intricacies of Britain's radar and their strategic interception system, you should check out the Battle of Britain documentary series by Real Engineering. Using state-of-the-art 3D animations and primary accounts, this documentary series is a deep dive into often overlooked aspects of the battle. And if you want to learn more about the massive logistical effort behind the Second World War's biggest amphibious operation and why it succeeded where Operation Sea Lion never stood a chance, you should also check out Real Engineering's Logistics of D-Day series. And where can you watch the Battle of Britain and Logistics of D-Day? On Nebula, a streaming service we're building together with other creators and where we don't have to worry about YouTube's almighty algorithm or advertising guidelines. On Nebula, you can watch exclusive content like the Battle of Britain or Logistics of D-Day, or our World War II documentary series 16 Days in Berlin and Rhineland 45. And all that is available in 4K resolution and also can be watched on your smart TV or phone. If you sign up at nebula.tv/realtimehistory, you can get Nebula for just $30 for an entire year. On Nebula, we and other creators also upload our regular videos ad-free and earlier than on YouTube. So you could watch Real Engineering's deep dive into the Spitfire on Nebula too. Again, that's nebula.tv/realtimehistory for just $30 while also supporting this channel. As usual, you can find all our sources in the video description below. Don't forget to check out our video on the Battle of France if you want to learn more about the lead up to the Battle of Britain. If you're watching this video on Patreon or Nebula, thank you so much for the support. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is a production of Real Time History, the only history channel that's stockpiling pepper for persistent, unwelcome visitors.